I think Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. I think the election was stolen, and I think he's going to be killed for his treason. How about that?
Black America, it's time that you understand that you are the moral pulse of America. White America never had a moral compass. And nothing makes this more evident than white support for Donald Trump. This is why I say, black people, you have to have an awakening and understand that Europeans are becoming more and more decivilized as they see blacks' numbers rising and their own numbers decreasing. And this insecurity has led to a faster deterioration in white people's mental stability.
And he does seem pretty confused about a lot.
What evidence do you have to bolster the idea that this isn't just a fair prosecution based on violations of the law?
They have no evidence to support it.
The indictments lay out.
They've been trying to impeach him so many times, and he doesn't get impeached.
Well, he got impeached, but this isn't impeachment. This is prosecution.
What?
This is unrelated to impeachment. This is a prosecution.
What? It's because they don't want him to win. They know he's going to win again.
But in, for example, the classified documents indictment, it lays out violations of the law as being alleged in the indictment.
Uh-huh.
And so you're saying those don't exist, or they don't actually violate the law, or what's going on there?
I don't think they exist.
So like the audio tape of Trump saying that he has a classified document and it's, I could have declassified it, but I can't anymore because I'm no longer president.
That Biden's son's been doing with Ukraine.
Well,
What I need Black America to understand, and I need us to really understand this, that white America have always been on the wrong side of history when it comes to political viewpoints. When it comes to any issues of humanitarianism, white America has always been on the wrong side of history. Their support has always been towards the negatives. You have to understand that white America perceived Dr. Martin Luther King as divisive. See, your very humanity, and for you to argue for your very humanity to be viewed by others, is considered divisive to Europeans. This is why Black America has to understand that you set the moral compass for America. And all that is humane in America's law come from you. All that is humane in America's culture come from blacks, including Memorial Day, which comes from blacks going, memorializing those who had died during the Civil War.
Tell me 3 Democratic policies that you support.
Inflation Reduction Act, American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Law, the PACT Act, the Chips and Science Act. I think it's good that Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I can go on.
No, I get. Wow.
What does this data tells us when looking at it, when you compose this data? When you look at the fact that blacks 90% voted Democratic with Biden and whites voted overwhelmingly 85% with Donald Trump, what does that tell you? That tells you Europeans does not really have a conscience. What that tells you is that Donald Trump supporters are the least informed and educated of the electorate.
Okay, would you like to talk about the pullout of Afghanistan?
Why did you feel bothered that I just listed policies I think are good?
Because
I think it's great that he lowers prescription drug costs.
you don't know enough about those policies.
So one of them in the Inflation Reduction Act is capping the cost of insulin for Medicare recipients at $35 out of pocket per month. And I think that's really good. I don't think seniors should be having themselves price gouged. And then also now Medicare can negotiate drug prices. They rolled out the first 10 medications they're going to negotiate.
On May 8th, 2022, I did a video called Trump Supporters Cut Off Their Nose to Spite Their Face. And in that video, which I will show you, I discuss Democrats' policies on healthcare versus the Republican policies on healthcare. And you will see who knows what they're talking about.
Forming a caravan and heading for the border. This chartered bus will travel from Minneapolis, Minnesota, across the border to Canada for a shopping excursion meant to draw attention to a crisis in the United States. The aim of the passengers to buy stocks of the life-saving drug insulin. Insulin prices can be 10 times more expensive in the US than Canada.
$1,200 a year per person on prescription drugs. That's more than anywhere else in the world. 1 in 4 say it is difficult to afford those costs. Both political parties are now looking to tackle that problem, but with some different approaches. As William Brangham reports, the Democrats in the House went first today by passing their own bill. The bill is passed.
It's an ambitious plan to change the government's role in the cost of prescription drugs, costs that are becoming prohibitively expensive for many Americans. The bill aims to lower the price tag for prescription drugs, partly by overturning a 2003 rule that blocked the federal government from negotiating most Medicare drug prices.
Imagine for a moment popping a pill before bed that costs about $13.50. Now imagine waking up the next morning, find that the price of the exact same pill jumped to $750 overnight. That is just what happened to one drug.
Thank you, Brian. And Martin Scarlett joins us now from the NASDAQ. He's the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals. Martin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you guys have said that the reason you increased this price so much after acquiring the drug was in order to do the research and development to develop a better version of Daraprim. I just got off the phone with an HIV doctor who told me they don't need a better version of this drug. What are you doing here?
Minnesota state lawmaker Lori Halverson, who herself has type 1 diabetes, says the legislation is critical.
We need this to live on a day-to-day basis. I don't get through a day without my insulin. I don't get through an hour without my insulin. We're a captive audience. We have to buy this drug. We don't have a choice. And so to gouge people who don't have a choice is unfair. It's unethical, and we need to make
2003, who was the president? Bush. 2003, Bush Medicare law prevented the government from negotiating Medicare prices, from preventing them from putting the cap on these pharmaceutical companies, raising the prices exorbitantly without no real explanation. That was the Republican Party then push. And as you see, medication has done nothing but skyrocketed in the U.S. The U.S. pay more for medication than any other industrial nation, but has the most pharmaceutical companies because they can scam the American people because the Republican Party is participating in that. The Republican Party is in on it with them, and poor whites will vote against their own self-interest. Let's be clear, poor whites are voting against Medicare for all, and they are uninsured. If the government provide it, then blacks can receive it too. If we receive it through our job, we can discriminate against blacks and not allow them to get it. This is the format and the process and the thinking of white people. Why do you think they want their health insurance tied to a job that they fear is going overseas? Jobs that they are scared are leaving, they want their health care tied to, rather than have their health care tied to their government.
So what a lot of companies do is raise venture capital funding when they see an important market for a drug, rather than raising the price on the current patients who need it to survive and who have no other choice but to take it and pay the higher price. Why wouldn't you go that route?
Well, we did raise one of the largest Series A financings in history for a biotech company. We raised over $90 million. And we also feel that this is the more appropriate price for Daraprim. At this price, Daraprim is still actually on the low end of what orphan drugs cost. And we're certainly not the first company to raise drug prices.
There is a reason that we pay nearly 4 times more for prescription drugs than other industrialized nations. They use negotiation to lower drug prices. We don't.
Republicans say it will hurt competition and shrink the number of new drugs entering the market. Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas.
People want more cures and lower drug costs. They don't want more cheap political shots. We do, as Republicans, oppose H.R. 3's government price setting regime because it will kill life-saving cures for Americans.
The House bill is not expected to pass the Senate, but the 50-page bill proposes 3 major changes. It lets the government negotiate Medicare prices for dozens of drugs each year, including insulin. It caps out-of-pocket costs for Medicare patients at $2,000 per year, and it forces drug makers to give rebates to the government if their Medicare drug prices rise faster than inflation.
What Medicare for All will do is save the average American substantial sums of money.
The U.S. already spends more money on healthcare than any other developed country compared to the U.S. and what reforms may be coming. In 2018, the United States spent around $10,500 on healthcare for each of its residents. The United Kingdom spent around $4,000. That means the United Kingdom spends 9.8% of its GDP on healthcare, while the US spends 16.9%. Despite spending less, the United Kingdom manages to have healthier citizens who live longer and are less likely to die. Germany. Here's how they did it. In 2017, U.S. healthcare spending came to around $10,200 per capita. In Germany, it was a little under $6,000. Overall, Germany spent about 11.2% of its GDP on healthcare, while the U.S. spent 17.1%. Germany manages to cover 100% of its population. In the United States, about 8.8% of the population remains uninsured. That comes to about 28 million people, with even more people underinsured. Despite spending less, Germany has better or comparable health outcomes to the United States. In 2017, it's estimated that Canada spent around 10.4% of its GDP on healthcare. By comparison, the United States is estimated to have spent about 17.2% of its GDP that year. The OECD estimates that Canada spent around $4,500 USD per person in 2017. In the United States, though, the figure is expected to be at least double that, at $10,000 per person. Out-of-pocket spending is also lower in Canada. On average, Canadians spent around $650 USD per person in 2016. The average for Americans was around $1,100 that year. Canada childbirth. In 2017, life expectancy in the UK was 2.7 years higher than in the US. And the UK has roughly 1.5 times fewer deaths that could have been avoided by access to better healthcare. The infant mortality rate is lower in the United Kingdom, with 3.9 deaths per 1,000 live births, as opposed to 5.8 in the United States. And the maternal mortality rate in the US is nearly 1.5 times higher. Studies show that in Germany, there were fewer deaths that could have been prevented with proper access to care. In 2013, there were 83 avoidable deaths out of every 100,000 people in Germany, while the United States had 112. Life expectancy in Germany is 2.5 years higher than the United States, and the infant mortality rate is lower in Germany, with 3.3 deaths per 1,000 live births, as opposed to 5.8 deaths in the United States. Additionally, the maternal mortality rate in the United States is more than 2 times higher than in Germany. Researchers looked at the rate of deaths that could have been prevented with proper access to care across 11 countries. Canada ranked 7th on the list, while America was last. We can see the same trends in infant mortality rates. Canada outperforms the US, but other countries like Sweden and Australia have much lower infant mortality rates than Canada. Canadians also live longer than Americans. Canada's average life expectancy is among the highest of all the countries and is nearly 4 years higher than the US. Additionally, Canada's maternal mortality rate is almost 4 times lower than that of the United States, and more Americans die of heart disease and stroke than Canadians. So how does Canada manage to spend less money than the United States while having a more effective healthcare system?
In Canada, everybody has the same treatment. It would drive them nuts if George got better health care than Sam did. That's not acceptable in Canada.
Europeans being this politically wrong is nothing new. When you look at how Martin Luther King posed when he was alive, you will see that even him standing up for his own humanity was seen as divisive. Him standing up for what's just was opposed to by most Americans, most white Americans. America see Martin Luther King Jr. as a hero now, but that wasn't the case during his lifetime. Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights leader and an American hero. Almost every American adult, 95% in U.S. news polls, believe he was an important figure in U.S. history. But it wasn't always that way. The fact that King is now beloved and has a national holiday commemorating his birthday wasn't something that obviously was going to happen during his lifetime. During the 1960s, King was a very divisive figure. The last Gallup poll to ask about his popularity during his lifetime, taken in 1966, found his unfavorable rating was 63%. This included 39% of Americans who gave him a 5 rating on a scale of 5, -5 being least favorable and +5 being most favorable. Black Americans saw things very different. The vast majority in 1963 thought his works for equal rights was moving at the right speed, 71%, or not fast enough, 21%, compared with 8% who believed it was happening too fast. In 1966, 84% of black adults had favorable views of King, while 4% had an unfavorable view. Even the immediate aftermath of his death, many Americans had a negative view of King. Nearly a third, 31% said he brought his 1968 assassination upon himself. Less than a majority, 42%, said they were sad. 38% or angry, 5%. What I want you to understand is why people never had a moral compass. You have to understand that. You have to understand that Black America have always been the moral compass of this country. And anything that indicates humanity when the plot in America was created by Black Americans. You have to understand this, Black people. You are dealing with inhumane, uncivilized beasts.